There is a hidden language in the way avoidant souls seek redemption, a quiet and unseen path to remorse that words cannot force, but presence can awaken. The shadow of avoidance is a silent yet powerful force, shaping the emotional behavior of those who struggle to confront intimacy and vulnerability. It is born not from malice but from a deep psychological wound, often formed in early life when connections with caregivers were inconsistent, suffocating, or emotionally unavailable. To survive emotionally, the avoidant personality learns to detach, to protect itself by minimizing the importance of closeness and suppressing the instinct to rely on others. This creates a hidden shadow within the psyche, a part of themselves they cannot easily face because it carries pain, shame, and fear of exposure. When they hurt someone they care about, this shadow is triggered. Deep inside, they often experience guilt and an awareness of the harm caused, but acknowledging it outwardly feels like stepping into a spotlight that exposes their inner fragility. Apologizing is not merely saying words of regret. It requires facing the very vulnerability they have spent a lifetime avoiding. This shadow does not operate on a conscious level. It resides in the unconscious, quietly dictating reactions and shaping emotional defenses. When confronted, the avoidant feels an intense need to retreat because conflict threatens their internal stability. Admitting fault feels like confirming the belief they secretly hold about themselves, that they are inadequate or incapable of forming secure bonds. Instead of leaning into connection to repair the damage, they instinctively pull away, leaving the other person feeling abandoned or unloved. Understanding this hidden layer of avoidance is essential because it reveals why direct demands for an apology often fail. They are not resisting out of arrogance but from a psychological necessity to protect the wounded self they have buried deep inside. To navigate this shadow, one must look beyond the visible behavior and see the unspoken battle happening beneath the surface. The avoidant is locked in a quiet war between the part of them that longs for closeness and the part that fears it will lead to annihilation of self. Every act of withdrawal is a shield against re-experiencing early pain, and every hesitation to apologize is a struggle against the terror of being emotionally naked. If the hurt they caused is forced into confrontation, the shadow tightens its grip, strengthening defenses and pushing them further away. But when met with understanding and non-judgmental presence, the shadow begins to soften. The avoidant senses safety not in words, but in the unspoken energy of acceptance. And this allows them to face their inner wounds without fearing rejection. Reaching the point where an avoidant can truly apologize means guiding them to acknowledge this shadow without making them feel overwhelmed or exposed. It involves patience, self-control, and the ability to recognize that their hurtful actions stem not from lack of care, but from an unresolved psychological mechanism. Only when they feel that their inner darkness will not be punished or used against them can they step into the vulnerable act of taking responsibility for the pain they caused. True transformation in someone who avoids emotional closeness begins with the creation of psychological safety. Avoidant individuals have learned to associate intimacy and emotional exposure with danger, often stemming from early experiences where attempts to express needs or emotions were met with rejection, neglect, or overwhelming control. This conditioning teaches them that opening up will lead to harm, and as a result, they develop rigid defenses to keep others at a distance. When these defenses are challenged, particularly through direct confrontation or demands for accountability, the avoidant psyche interprets it as a threat to their survival. They respond not with openness or remorse, but with withdrawal, emotional shutdown, or even anger as a means of self-protection. Understanding this dynamic is crucial because it shifts the approach from one of forceful confrontation to one of creating a space where they feel safe enough to lower their guard. Psychological safety is not built through words alone. It is communicated through presence, tone, and consistent actions. An avoidant person must sense that they are not under attack and that their worth is not being questioned. When they feel judged, criticized, or pressured to change, they tighten their emotional armor and retreat even further. This makes genuine apology nearly impossible because their nervous system is still braced for battle. In contrast, when met with calmness and understanding, their defenses begin to loosen. The mind interprets this non-threatening stance as an environment where honesty will not lead to punishment or loss of dignity. This quiet assurance lays the foundation for authentic remorse to surface naturally rather than being forced out of fear or obligation. Another element of psychological safety is patience. Avoidant individuals need time to process emotions internally before expressing them outwardly. Many carry a fear of being emotionally overwhelmed if they face conflict too quickly. A person seeking an apology must resist the instinct to rush or corner them into immediate accountability. By giving them emotional space without withdrawing love or respect, one signals that there is no looming danger in acknowledging mistakes. This combination of emotional distance and supportive presence creates a paradoxical effect. It reassures them that they can step forward without losing autonomy. Empathy plays a vital role as well. When an avoidant feels understood at a deep emotional level, particularly when someone recognizes the pain and fear beneath their defensive actions, it disrupts their learned narrative that vulnerability equals harm. This recognition fosters an internal sense of safety, allowing them to confront their conscience without the crippling fear of judgment. In this secure psychological environment, an avoidant begins to feel the weight of their actions and develops the courage to apologize. This apology, unlike one demanded through conflict, carries sincerity because it arises from a state where their inner self feels protected enough to face vulnerability and take responsibility for the pain they caused. An avoidant individual is often misunderstood as someone who lacks care or remorse. But beneath their detached demeanor lies a psyche that responds differently to emotional cues. One of the most powerful influences on their behavior is the presence of inner strength in the person they have hurt. This strength is not loud or confrontational. It is quiet, grounded, and unwavering. When someone approaches an avoidant from a place of emotional desperation, seeking validation or chasing after an apology, the avoidant's defenses instinctively rise. Their subconscious associates this pursuit with a loss of control and potential engulfment, leading them to retreat further into emotional distance. It is not because they do not recognize the hurt they have caused, but because the energy of neediness triggers their survival mechanisms, pushing them into self-preservation rather than reconciliation. Inner strength, on the other hand, communicates a different message to their unconscious mind. It tells them that the person they hurt is whole, self-respecting, and not seeking completion or healing solely from their acknowledgement. This stance disarms the avoidant's fear of being emotionally consumed or held hostage by guilt. When faced with calmness and stability instead of emotional chaos, they begin to feel less threatened and more capable of introspection. This reflection is critical because genuine apology is born not from pressure, but from an internal reckoning with one's actions. The presence of inner strength also acts as a psychological mirror. Avoidant individuals, though withdrawn, are not devoid of conscience. They often carry silent guilt for the pain they cause but lack the tools to express it openly. When confronted with someone who remains firm in self-respect, not collapsing under emotional pain or resorting to manipulation, the avoidant is forced to see their own behavior more clearly. This mirror effect stirs discomfort in their psyche, a quiet reminder that they have hurt someone who refuses to be diminished by their detachment. It is this discomfort, not accusations or demands, that begins to awaken their dormant capacity for remorse. Maintaining boundaries is another aspect of this inner strength. Boundaries signal that while forgiveness may be possible, harmful behavior will not be tolerated indefinitely. This does not mean building walls or shutting the avoidant out. Rather, it is about standing firmly in one's emotional truth without pleading for acknowledgement. Such strength communicates authenticity and self-worth, which paradoxically makes it safer for the avoidant to approach. Instead of feeling trapped in a dynamic where they must defend themselves or run away, they are given the space to willingly step forward. Over time, this consistent display of resilience penetrates the avoidant's defensive layers. They realize that the relationship dynamic is not one of dependency or control, but of mutual respect. This realization gradually dismantles their internal resistance to apology. When they finally do express remorse, it emerges from a place of genuine self-awareness, drawn out by the silent yet transformative power of another's inner strength. To draw out an authentic apology from someone who avoids emotional vulnerability, one must embody what can be called the archetype of compassionate detachment. This psychological stance is neither cold nor indifferent. Rather, it is a balanced state of empathy and self-preservation. An avoidant individual carries an internal fear of emotional engulfment and often interprets closeness as a threat to autonomy. When someone seeks to pull them into an emotional exchange, especially one centered on blame or demands for accountability, their defenses instinctively rise, pushing them further away. Compassionate detachment counters this pattern by offering understanding without entanglement, warmth without dependency. It signals to the avoidant that their inner space will not be invaded, which begins to soften the rigid armor they use for protection. Compassion in this context means recognizing the avoidant's pain and fear beneath their distancing behavior. It is an awareness that their withdrawal is not rejection of love, but a strategy for emotional survival shaped by past wounds. Holding compassion allows one to avoid retaliatory reactions like anger, desperate pleas, or manipulation, all of which confirm the avoidant's unconscious belief that closeness leads to chaos or loss of control. Detachment, however, ensures that this compassion does not transform into self-sacrifice. The person seeking an apology does not lose themselves in trying to fix or rescue the avoidant. Instead, they maintain their emotional center while extending understanding from a place of inner stability. This archetype has a transformative effect on the avoidant psyche. Normally, when they feel others pulling too hard for emotional resolution, they retreat further because they perceive it as an attempt to dismantle their boundaries. But when compassion is paired with detachment, there is no forceful pull, only a calm presence that allows the avoidant to breathe without fear of losing independence. This non-intrusive energy disrupts the defensive cycle and invites curiosity rather than resistance. The avoidant begins to sense that they can approach without being judged, controlled, or consumed. Another element of this archetype is quiet observation. Rather than reacting impulsively to avoidance or hurtful actions, one holds space while witnessing the behavior without feeding into it emotionally. This does not mean tolerating mistreatment, but recognizing that reactive conflict only deepens avoidance. Through detached compassion, boundaries are calmly enforced without hostility, showing the avoidant that accountability is expected yet safe to express. The lack of emotional warfare signals a higher level of consciousness, something the avoidant's unconscious can feel, even if they cannot articulate it. Over time, this stance draws out authenticity from the avoidant. Since their fear of engulfment is not being triggered, their natural conscience is free to surface. Compassion offers them understanding, while detachment reassures them that they are not trapped in a suffocating emotional entanglement. In this balanced presence, they can finally face their own actions without terror, allowing genuine remorse to emerge and an apology to be expressed freely, unbound by fear or defensive pride. An avoidant individual processes emotions differently from those who are comfortable with intimacy, and one of the most profound ways to reach their deeper self is through silence and patience. Avoidants have learned to cope with emotional pain by retreating inward, analyzing and containing feelings privately rather than expressing them outwardly. When conflict or emotional hurt occurs, their instinct is not to confront it directly, but to withdraw into an internal sanctuary where they feel safe from criticism or judgment. This withdrawal is not indifference, but a method of self-regulation that allows them to regain composure in solitude. Attempting to force a rapid conversation, confrontation, or demand for an apology during this period only strengthens their defenses. They perceive urgency or pressure as a threat to their emotional equilibrium and respond by reinforcing walls that are already deeply ingrained from earlier life experiences of unmet needs or emotional overwhelm. Silence acts as a psychological balm for this defensive state. When one refrains from chasing, arguing, or repeatedly seeking acknowledgement, the avoidant feels an unusual absence of pressure. This absence begins to unsettle their habitual patterns because the expected cycle of conflict and retreat no longer exists. In the quiet, their own conscience and internal dialogue become louder. They can no longer fully escape the discomfort of having hurt someone because there is no external battle to distract them. The silence becomes a mirror that reflects their behavior inwardly, allowing them to witness the impact of their actions without feeling attacked. This process is slow and requires patience because their emotional processing is like an undercurrent, subtle and invisible to those waiting for resolution. Patience is equally critical because avoidants need time to trust both themselves and the relational dynamic before expressing vulnerability. For them, apology is not a simple act of saying sorry, but a significant step into exposure and intimacy that feels inherently risky. Rushing this process only confirms their fear that emotional closeness leads to discomfort or loss of control. Patience communicates a different message, that the connection is not dependent on immediate resolution, and there is room for them to arrive at remorse naturally without coercion. This steady presence signals safety, giving their unconscious mind permission to soften its rigid defenses over time. The combination of silence and patience works as a form of emotional alchemy. It transforms the relational atmosphere from one of tension to one of introspection. As the avoidant sits with their own thoughts in this non-reactive space, guilt and empathy slowly surface. These feelings are no longer suppressed by defensive arguments or external blame. Instead, they arise internally, where true transformation occurs. Eventually, this inner shift compels the avoidant to reach out, not because they were cornered or forced, but because they genuinely recognize the hurt they caused. When they finally apologize, it carries depth and authenticity, forged in the quiet space where their defenses melted and their humanity could finally emerge. When you understand the shadow they hide behind, create safety without demand, stand in unshaken strength, hold compassion without losing yourself, and allow silence to work its quiet transformation, the avoidant is no longer trapped in fear. In this stillness, guilt becomes recognition, recognition becomes humility, and humility finally gives birth to the apology you have long deserved.